Could there have been peace between the Wraith and the Lanteans? The short answer is no. The long answer is no. So it's odd the Lanteans even tried. In case you don't remember, we learned about this event during the episode Before I Sleep, where the expedition encounters a weir from an alternate timeline, one where most of the expedition was killed when they discovered Atlantis. This weir managed to survive by traveling back in time to the final days of the Lantean Wraith War. And she says something rather interesting when she retells what the Lanteans told her about the Wraith.
The Lanteans sent a delegation, protected by their most powerful warships, in the faint hope of negotiating a truce. One-on-one, the Lantean ships were more powerful, but the Wraith were so many. After that great battle, it was only a matter of time.
This is kind of interesting and makes me wonder, could there have been peace between the Lanteans and the Wraith? First, we need to pin down when this event took place, as this line of dialogue is kind of the only thing we have to go on, and it's not very clear about when this event would have happened. In my mind, it could have only have happened during two time periods, the Middle War period and sometime during the siege years. During the early war, the Lanteans wouldn't really have a reason to try and make a truce with the Wraith, as they dominated on the battlefield at the start of the war. I'm half convinced they probably didn't even see it as a war at the time.
This is pest control!
But when the Wraith gained the ZPMs and began growing their army, they suddenly had greater numbers than the Lanteans, which would line up with alternate Weir's comments about the Wraith's greater numbers. My thinking, and again this is just my guess on when this would have happened, was as the war started to turn in favor of the Wraith, the Lanteans sent a delegation to make a truce. And they sent their most powerful warships as a show of force, to show the Wraith that while they had the greater numbers, the Lanteans still had the more powerful ships and could win almost any battle. We don't really know what happened to the delegation or the fleet, if they ever made contact with the Wraith, but based on what alternate Weir said, some kind of battle took place. Maybe the Wraith attacked them on sight, ambushed them, or maybe some talks were had, but whatever happened, it did not end in peace. And based on what Weir said, it's most likely that the Lanteans lost whatever battle took place, or it wasn't the astounding victory the Lanteans hoped for.
After that great battle, it was only a matter of time.
This might also explain why the Lanteans spent the rest of the war looking for a superweapon, such as the Nanites, Project Arcturus, or the Atera device. Perhaps the battle was far more costly, and they didn't have the time or resources to rebuild their fleet. The other option was it could have taken place during the siege years, when the Lanteans were pushed back to the Lantean system and spent the next several years under siege. This would line up with the part Weir said about being a faint hope and still tie into the rest of what she said. It also would make some sense since that would have been closer to the time she arrived at the city. Personally, I feel like this event would most likely have happened during the Middle War period. Alternate Weir says the most powerful warships were sent, which to me indicates that this was when the Lanteans were still at the height of their power. And also would be the best time to try something like this. If we assume that this event would have happened when the war started to turn in favor of the Wraith, this means Wraith victory might not have been assured. Yes, they were starting to win, but as far as they knew, they weren't going to completely destroy the whole Lantean dominion yet. In theory, the Wraith might have been willing to take some kind of deal and guarantee all the territory they had gained, quit while you're ahead and all that. Like I said, we don't know what happened with the delegation, if again there was a meeting or not, but let's say there was, where the Lanteans did win the great battle. In the end, both sides came to the negotiation table.
I thought it would make our discussions more comfortable. I hope they prove as delicious as the farmers who grew them.
Alright, let's just get this over with.
So, I understand you have a proposal.
The Pegasus Galaxy would most likely be divided between the two. Though I don't think this needs to be said, this wouldn't be an eternal peace. Definitely the Wraith and the smarter ones among the Lanteans would view this as a way to build up their war assets. Essentially a galactic-wide Cold War between the two, each side biding their time till they are ready to restart the war. Funny enough, this might lead to a Lantean victory in the long term. In the last few videos, I've been somewhat critical of the Lanteans' handling of the war. The fact they spent most of it looking for some kind of super weapon to turn the tide, but when a single problem came up, they gave up on projects. However, someone pointed out they were losing the war for over 100 years. That means a loss of ships, manpower, territory, and resources. Perhaps they did this because they didn't have a choice. They didn't have the luxury to waste time and resources on projects that in the end, from their perspective, might not even work. But if there was some kind of peace, this would give the Lanteans time to rebuild their forces and perhaps test out these super weapons without the constant worry of being overrun. Now this would also give the Wraith time to prepare as well, but that might hurt them in the long run. See, the Wraith won the war by using overwhelming numbers, but the thing about a large army is you need to feed it. This worked well for them in the OG timeline because with every new system they captured meant more food for them to feed on. However, in this scenario, while the Wraith would be given new territory, they've ultimately kind of put themselves in a cage. They would have to put some kind of limit on their army size or risk eating all the food.
They would exhaust the food supply in a matter of months.
Which is a really big problem for them. Again, the way they won the war was through overwhelming numbers. But if they can't grow their army because of limited food supply, this means the Lanteans could match them or even outgrow them. The problem with feeding on humans is it takes 15 to 18 years for us to reach an age when we can reproduce. Meaning that for every world the Wraith culled, they'd have to wait almost 2 decades before they can go back or risk losing the entire food supply. Compare that with crops or animals that mature faster, which I assume the Lanteans use, or some other way to grow food. It would be a lot faster, meaning they can bounce back quicker and grow their population sooner. Meanwhile, the Wraith, unless they decide to use some very messed up human farming thing, would be kinda stuck. I imagine that in this scenario, it would probably be the Wraith that break the treaty, as they would need to expand their territory for more food. That or risk limiting their army size, which would put them on equal footing with the Lanteans, risk some kind of civil war over feeding rounds, or go into hibernation, which would give the Lanteans an opportunity to invade and wipe them out. Which is probably why the Wraith didn't go for this option. Again, they were starting to win and probably knew they couldn't trust the Lanteans, so they pushed their advantage. There's also the siege years options, which would probably also never happen. But if I had to pick, I'd say their best chance of it working would be right at the start. The Lantean system was extremely well defended with defense satellites, and we see Lantean ships away from the system even during the final days of the siege years, which to me says they didn't need these to defend the system or Atlantis. It could be that when the Lantean system was all that was left, the Lanteans sent out the delegation, one that was protected by the most powerful warships left. And it was to send the message that, hey, this system is too hard to take, let's make peace. Though I don't think this would have worked even if they won the battle, since by this point the Wraith had played this game for a while. Sure, they might lose the great battle, but they can just come back later with more forces. Nothing had really changed by this point for them to consider not attacking them. Here's how I look at it. Imagine at the end of World War II, Germany sent a delegation to the Allies with a proposition they give up all German territory, except for Berlin. That will stay in Nazi control, but the Allies get everything else. By this point, the Allies were going to get everything else. They weren't just going to let their enemy just sit there. Similarly, in the Lantean Wraith War, the Wraith knew the Lanteans would be doing something. They spent most of the war trying to make super weapons, like the Atero device, to wipe them out. And remember that Doctor Who clip I played earlier? I genuinely think that at the start of the war, the Lanteans didn't even view it as a war, and saw the Wraith as a pest to be wiped out. And that's not even going into the books, which in their lore, established the Wraith as a result of Lantean experimentation. Though this is not strictly speaking canon with the shows, or just my thoughts on the matter. Either way, why would the Wraith let them have their single system? That, as we saw, they can still exert power with their ships, or find some kind of magic bullet to kill them all. Now, I know someone's going to ask why they left the Asurans alone. The Asurans were a different animal, and with the attack code shut down, the Asurans weren't going to attack the Wraith. Basically, the Wraith didn't want to poke the bear. Before we leave, I do want to take a quick look at the Atlantis Legacy books, which spoilers in 3, 2, 1. Ended in a peace treaty between the Tari and the Wraith. The galaxy was divided between Wraith and humans. Part of the reason this could work was a new retrovirus which allowed the Wraith to feed on humans without killing them. The problem with any peace with the Wraith, at least between humans, is the Wraith feed on humans. You can't negotiate around that the way you can with the Goa'uld. The Lanteans were never going to throw the humans under the bus or allow themselves to be fed upon. And something you might have noticed is that the Tari did try and come up with some ways to end the Wraith feeding without killing the entire species. As far as we know, the Lanteans never tried this. Their immediate response to the Wraith seemed to have been trying to wipe them out, and almost never got out of that mindset. So naturally, war between the two was inevitable, and peace was just never an option. What do you all think? Do you think there was a way the two species could have made peace? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Leave a like and subscribe. Follow me on my social medias. And remember,
your people will not be harmed. Such will be the nature of our agreement. Balance will be restored. I believe that is as much as either of us can ask for. Don't you?